Sleep paralysis is a bizarre and terrifying experience that blurs the lines between wakefulness and dreams. It's the feeling of being completely aware but unable to move, often accompanied by vivid, sometimes horrifying, hallucinations. If you've ever felt frozen in your bed, unable to scream or even twitch a finger, while strange figures loom in the shadows, you've likely had a brush with this unsettling phenomenon. Several people have shared their encounters with this strange state, each leaving a lasting impact. One individual recounted their experience during a stressful finals week in college. Exhausted from studying, they drifted off to sleep, only to wake in a state of paralysis. Their eyes scanned the dark room until they landed on a woman standing at the foot of their bed. She wore a black dress and held a long object. As she approached and knelt, her face became clear. It was their mother. They desperately tried to call out, but no sound escaped. The woman touched their forehead, made eye contact, then stood and vanished into the doorway. Moments later, the paralysis lifted, and they screamed for their mom, only to be met by their dad, who sadly reminded them that their mother had passed away just 3 weeks prior. The experience was a haunting blend of grief and the uncanny, leaving a profound emotional scar. Another person described a sleep paralysis episode that began with a bizarre nightmare. They woke from the dream, still unable to move, to a faint, indescribable robotic sound that grew louder with each repetition. Their eyes fixated on the crack in their closet door, which they always kept closed. There, a distorted face of a man with an unnaturally large, open-mouthed smile peered out. With every repeated sound, the closet and the face seemed to draw closer until the door slammed shut and the noise ceased. The paralysis lifted, and though 24, they ran to their dad for reassurance. Their dad confirmed it was likely sleep paralysis, having experienced it himself, but the disturbing image of the grinning face remained. A particularly traumatic experience involved a thing in the closet that the individual believed was evil. They struggled to look directly at the closet door during the paralysis, their head involuntarily turning away. When they finally woke, a cold sweat enveloped them, and a sickening, silent laughter washed over them from the closet. Suddenly, a human head, belonging to a girl they knew from high school, was thrown onto their chest. Paralyzed and unable to scream, they could only grunt and moan, wriggling desperately to dislodge it. This lasted for what felt like an eternity before they truly awoke. The trauma of the event lingered for weeks, making them question the reality of their waking state and leaving them with an unsettling memory of the sinister laugh. One individual recounted their third experience with sleep paralysis, which differed significantly from their previous two. They awoke in the early morning, unable to move, and heard heavy footsteps approaching their bedroom. Their brother, sister, dad, and mom entered, all sobbing hysterically and appearing unnaturally tall, almost touching the ceiling. They stood over the bed, crying, as the paralyzed individual desperately tried to cry out. As quickly as they appeared, the family turned and walked back downstairs. Once the paralysis lifted, the person ran downstairs to find their family fast asleep in their own rooms. Days later, they were struck by a speeding car, resulting in broken bones and a fractured thigh. While hospitalized, all 4 family members stood by their bed, their mother emotional and crying a scene eerily similar to their sleep paralysis experience. Though not superstitious, they couldn't shake the feeling that the dream had been a premonition. Finally, an individual shared a chilling experience after a night out with friends. They had encountered someone hiding in a bush, making a weird, off-putting sound. Later that night, they awoke in sleep paralysis, unable to move, and heard the familiar sound from the bush. Their eyes fixed on the foot of their bed, where a grotesque, demonic, ghost-like head floated. As it drew closer, they realized it had a body that blended into the darkness. Its mouth hung open, emitting the same disturbing noise. It came within inches of their face before fading away. They screamed and regained control of their body, shaken by the vividness of the experience. Their parents confirmed it was sleep paralysis, but were equally disturbed by the demonic apparition. One individual recounted a few experiences with sleep paralysis, but one stood out vividly. They woke up in bed, unable to move a muscle. The room was dark, but enough light filtered in from the street lamp outside to make out the shapes of the furniture. Then they saw a tall, dark, shadowy figure standing perfectly still by the bedroom door. It was just a silhouette, but its presence felt heavy and malevolent. They tried to scream, to thrash, to do anything, but their body remained. Completely unresponsive, all they could do was stare at this silent, watchful entity. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there. Observing the sheer helplessness, combined with the feeling of being watched by something utterly unnatural, was terrifying. It felt like an eternity before the paralysis finally broke, and they bolted upright, drenched in sweat, heart-pounding asterisk. The room was empty, but the image of that shadow figure by the door remains burned into memory. This happened to one person when they were a teenager. They were lying in bed, and suddenly they couldn't move. Their eyes darted around the room, and then they saw it, a gigantic spider, easily the size of a dinner plate, scuttling across the ceiling directly above them. Its legs were spindly and black, and it moved with an unsettling speed. The worst part was that they knew it wasn't real, intellectually, but their body's primal fear response was completely overwhelming. They could feel its presence, almost, a vibrating sensation in the air above them. It seemed to pause directly over their face, its numerous eyes staring down. They desperately wanted to scream or bat it away, but they were utterly frozen. The paralysis lifted abruptly, and they remembered yelping, jumping out of bed, and flipping on the lights. Of course, there was nothing there, but for a good hour afterward, they couldn't bring themselves to lie back down in bed. One individual was sleeping on their stomach, which was unusual for them when they woke up totally paralyzed. The room was dark, and they felt a sudden, icy cold sensation around their ankles. They knew instantly it wasn't their blankets. It felt like cold, bony hands were gripping them, slowly tightening their hold. Panic set in. They tried to kick, to pull their legs away, but their body was useless. The grip intensified, and they could feel themselves being slowly, steadily dragged down towards the foot of the bed. It wasn't a fast drag, but a deliberate, slow pull, as if whatever had them was savoring the moment. They could hear a faint, guttural breathing sound coming from below the bed, hitting closer. Just as they felt their feet slip off the edge of the mattress, the paralysis snapped, and they shot up, gasping for air. Their ankles were free, and there was nothing there, but the feeling of those hands, and the slow drag stayed with them for days. A particularly disturbing sleep paralysis experience for one individual involved sound more than sight. They woke up, unable to move, and immediately noticed a presence right beside their head. It wasn't visible, but they could feel it, a chilling proximity. Then, a whispering voice, distorted and guttural, began to speak directly into their ear. They couldn't make out the words, but the tone was undeniably sinister and threatening. It sounded like a collection of broken whispers, overlapping and swirling, constantly repeating this unintelligible, evil-sounding message. The closer they tried to listen, the more unsettling it became, and a profound sense of dread washed over them. It felt like this entity was trying to tell them something horrifying, something they absolutely did not want to understand. The whispering grew louder and more frantic, filling their entire head, until finally, with a jolt, they could move again. They remembered holding their breath, listening, but the room was silent. One individual had experienced sleep paralysis on and off for years, but one time it was particularly vivid. They woke up and couldn't move, and that familiar heavy feeling settled over them. As their eyes adjusted to the dim light, they saw a small child sitting at the foot of their bed, facing away from them. It was wearing what looked like old-fashioned clothes, and its head was slightly bowed. There was no sound, just this silent, still figure. Then, very slowly, its head began to turn. They tried to close their eyes, to look away, but they were forced to watch. As its head continued to turn, they realized it didn't have normal features. Its face was distorted, almost skeletal, with large, empty eye sockets. It turned its head completely around to face them, and then it slowly began to crawl towards them on all fours, its movements jerky and unnatural. They felt an intense, irrational fear, the kind that makes one's blood run cold. Just as it reached their knees, the paralysis lifted, and they gasped, practically falling out of bed. It was a terrifying experience, leaving them with a lingering sense of unease.